Taking the Bandage, Growing Up in Paris, Day 1. I always think of Paris as the place I grew up. Sometimes I still say that, dropping it lightly into a conversation with just the right blend of world-weary nostalgia and amusement. Just that and a quick smile, nothing more. For as Annie's grand-mère told me all those years ago, never apologise, mon enfant, never explain. On a couple of occasions, Greg has tried to pin me down, asking me how long I actually lived there, how old I was at the time. As a lawyer, he has an eye for detail, and knowing my own life story as well as his own by now, he has always had trouble fitting Lizzie's Paris years into the CV. "Oh," I say, stretching and yawning. "I must have been around 13, I guess." And then I distract him, which is easily done. In fact, I was 13 and a half, tall and gangly with serious freckles, a mop of unfashionably curly hair and a defensive scowl, all of which I was painfully aware of as I stood in the ferry terminal at Calais, waiting for the Thielman family. French had never been my strong subject, and I was dreading the ordeal of speaking it for the next 7 days. How many times could I get away with repeating, "Je m'appelle Lizzie, j'ai 13 ans, j'ai 2 frères et 2 sœurs"? Perhaps if I started each sentence with "je suis," they would finish them for me. And what if they replied in French? And where were they anyway, my exchange family? Had they got the wrong day? Was I in the wrong place? I shifted my weighty rucksack onto my other shoulder and tried to look like a world-weary traveller rather than a scared child who'd hugged her mother desperately hard at Victoria Station just a few hours earlier. "Hello there, are you Lizzie by any chance?" A good-looking man in a yellow shirt with a burgundy sweater draped around his shoulders strode towards me, his hand outstretched. "Marvellous to meet you. I'm Pierre Thielman. Welcome. This is my daughter Annie." He spoke English. I was almost nauseous with relief. A girl stood behind him. "Salut," she said briefly, and stepping up to me, pecked a quick kiss on each cheek. I recoiled, startled, but was relieved to see that she wasn't pretty, although she did have startlingly green eyes. Teenage competitiveness can be cruel. She was short and intense, with straight brown hair and a bored expression. "Bonjour," I said shakily. "Je m'appelle Lizzie, j'ai 13 ans." I thought I'd save the bit about having 2 brothers and 2 sisters for another time. Annie and I sat in the back of their Citroën as Monsieur Thielman drove to Paris. We didn't talk, though we exchanged quick glances from time to time, sizing each other up. She was dressed like a teacher in a boring pleated skirt and blue blouse. I saw her looking at the colourful patches and flared inserts of my jeans and flashed her a grin. Her eyes widened and she turned away. "She's jealous," I told myself bravely. It was late afternoon by the time we reached Paris. All I remember now is a long, slow crawl through heavy traffic, with Monsieur Thielman throwing up his hands at fellow motorists and occasionally apologising over his shoulder for shouting words I guessed were rude. He said "impossible" a lot, and I practised it silently to my reflection in the window. And then, suddenly, we were in an open space with trees and crowds, and there in the middle, looking quite at home, was the one and only Eiffel Tower. I forgot I was trying to be cool. "Oh, look!" "Quoi?" said Annie, and then smiled. "Ah oui, la Tour Eiffel." "It's the Eiffel Tower," I said, swivelling myself against the window to glimpse the top. "Wow!" "Here we say la Tour Eiffel," said Annie. "La Tour Eiffel," I repeated. "Good accent," said Monsieur Thielman, swerving the car round a motorbike and heading for the other side of the river. After a whistle-stop car tour of the main tourist attractions, we drove home through pretty tree-lined avenues. Monsieur Tielemann pulled up abruptly outside a large grey-fronted house with deep windows and a small wrought-iron gate. A black cat with white paws slithered under the hedge and disappeared. As he lifted the rucksack out of the boot with one hand, he coolly lit a gitane with the other and walked up to the door, the cigarette between his lips. Inside there were more introductions, to Mrs. Tielemann, known as Céleste, and to Bernard, Annie's older brother, who gave me a firm handshake and carried my bag upstairs. Everyone made a big effort to put me at ease as we settled down and began to get acquainted, but it was tiring to be surrounded by French speakers, and I realised it was going to be a long 7 days. Annie showed me around the house. The interior was rather gloomy, with burgundy-flocked wallpaper, dark woodwork, and dark green gloss paint stretching up the stairwell. The living room had voluminous navy velvet drapes at the window, neatly gathered in just like something from one of the old films my father watched at home. In passing, I noticed the door to the basement, which was wide open, allowing loud French music to drift upstairs. I only knew 2 French singers, Edith Piaf and Charles Aznavour. Perhaps it was one of them? I lingered, listening. "Oh, that's where my grandma lives," said Annie casually. "You'll get to meet her in a while because we will have an aperitif with her before dinner. Anyway, let's go upstairs and I'll show you our bedroom." I was to share Annie's bedroom, which was spacious and high-ceilinged and offered a view over the street. In the corner stood a round sink with pale lemon towels hung neatly on rails at either side. Out of the tall window you could see a fine view across to the city centre in the distance, the spire of Notre Dame just visible. "Wow, this bedroom is so tidy," I exclaimed in a voice that was practically a squeal. "Yes, I tidied it specially for you," Annie replied, smiling. "You don't mind sharing with me, do you?" I wasn't sure if it was rude to answer the question honestly, and settled for a polite, "No, I don't mind," trying not to pull my frowny face. I started to unpack my rucksack and took out the small gifts I had brought for the family: Cornish fudge for Monsieur Tielemann and Bernard, and a floral tea towel for Mrs. Tielemann. For Annie, there was a special gift, a diary with the Union Jack on the front cover. She was delighted and threw her arms around my neck. On the dot of 6 o'clock, the bell chimed out down in the hall. "Time for aperitifs with Grandma," said Annie. This turned out to be a nightly ritual, except for Sundays when Grandma ate with the family at a more formal Sunday lunch. As we descended the stairs, I was struck by the sweet, sickly smell of stale air wafting up towards us. At the bottom of the stairs, doors opened onto a formal drawing room where, enthroned in a high-backed green velvet chair, sat an elderly lady, exquisitely made up, with bright red Dior lips set against her pale, matte-powdered cheeks. "Welcome to Paris, my dear. My name is Florence," she said in her best English accent. The feathery lines around her mouth moved in and out as she spoke. She held out a tiny wrinkled hand, its nails painted in the same shade of red as her lipstick. "Do you play cards?" She looked directly at me as she spoke, which made me feel a little uncomfortable. "Well, yes, I do, but I'm not very good," I said, winking at Annie. "My favourite game is piquet." Florence turned to her granddaughter. "Annie, will you make the drinks, please, ma chérie? 1 part pastis and 3 parts water, remember?" Annie nodded, poured 3 glasses and added water, which turned the clear liquid cloudy. My nose began to twitch as a strong scent of licorice filled the room. "Santé," said Grandma Florence. My inexperience led me to take a gulp, which burnt first my lips and then my throat as it disappeared down. Topping it up with more water seemed to ease the burning sensation, and I sipped slowly from then on, while Florence and Annie chatted animatedly about this and that. After about 40 minutes, we heard a shout from upstairs saying dinner was about to be served. It was time to leave Grandma, who preferred to dine alone, and head up to the dinner table. Frankly, I couldn't wait to escape the overpowering licorice perfume in the room and slipped into the downstairs cloakroom en route to rinse out my mouth. The first Thielmann dinner was a cold buffet type of affair. The table was laden with cold pink meats, with some round white cheeses on a board and a baguette neatly sliced in a basket. This all looked reasonably appetizing, even if I didn't yet recognize brie and camembert. But then I saw the accompanying salad, a large plate of cold French beans swimming in a pool of oil. My anxiety level started to rise. Perhaps it was the pastis that had unsettled my stomach. We were offered small glasses of red wine to accompany our meal, which didn't help my rising nausea. Everyone else helped themselves to the beans and moved confidently on to a steaming dish of garlicky potatoes. The pommes de terre dauphinoise, it soon became obvious, were a Thielmann favourite. Hot potatoes with salad, I thought, confused. But they looked like something that would soak up the alcohol, so I helped myself to a large second spoonful. I was also starving. But how was I going to decline the oily grey beans in my limited French without causing offence? Pas de problème, said Mrs. Thielmann, as I hastily passed the next dish over to Bernard. He sat facing me, tall, smiling, and watching my every move as if waiting for me to make a mistake. I tried to look relaxed and confident, all the time pretty sure it wasn't working. With dinner over, Annie and I helped to clear the table and swiftly relocated to the bedroom on the upper floor. So, will Bernard be here to show us around tomorrow? I inquired casually, trying not to fidget. Who knows, said Annie. And then, are you okay, Lizzie? You look very pale. Citing tiredness as the reason, I excused myself and bolted for the bathroom to be sick. I held back my unruly mop of hair and vomited my stomach contents over the bright white porcelain. Not such a brilliant start to my French exchange trip. I can't do this, I thought, staring at my wet, flushed face in the mirror. I'll call Mum in the morning and ask to go home. After rinsing my mouth under the tap and brushing my teeth, I wisely decide on an early night. As I slid in between the cool pink sheets, I started to think about Bernard. It was strange, as I wouldn't have given him a second glance if I were back home. But my observation skills had been commended on more than one occasion. What had I noticed then? Firstly, he had a stubbly chin with a few spots around his temples. His teeth were perfectly aligned, and I could see no sign of any chunky braces. When he smiled, his lips pouted a little. I would come to learn that although his hands were small, they were the same hands that played a tenor saxophone when he thought no one was listening. I wondered, is this what it's like being a teenager? Sleep washed over me in a haze of mixed emotions. Bonsoir, Lizzie.